Hello, everyone, in Social Work 668 spring semester of 2022. This is your professor, Leslie Harris here. I am excited for weeks 4 and weeks 5 because this is on my favorite topic, which is qualitative data collection, a little bit more so qualitative data analysis. So I'm going to get right into it and share my screen with you. Okay, so we are going to be focusing on strategies on how to analyze your qualitative data. So at this point in the course, you should have identified 3 participants for your needs assessment assignment, the first major assignment of this class, which is due in a couple weeks, and we'll go over that later on. We need to start developing a plan to interview your participants. So some of you have sent me your example interview guides. In this week's course content, I will also have posted an example interview guide that you can emulate that has a lot of fill in the blanks that you can put your topic and your participant population in and your focus of your needs assessment. And I'm hopeful that that will help you really focus in on your assignment and the kinds of questions that would be helpful for you to ask. So at this point, just do a self check-in. You should have identified and contacted 3 participants for your needs assessment. And many of you have submitted plans this week, which have all sounded great. You're really doing a combination of interviewing service providers or people that are policymakers, or some of you have identified clients, not your own clients, but people that are recipients of services that you were interested in investigating. So we're really excited to see how those unfold. So again, you had your needs assessment class last week, week 3. We talked about developing an interview plan and interview guidelines. And I want to share with you a few notes about interviewing, because I imagine that you are all, or you should be, scheduling your interviews right now. So just to clarify, as we approach participants for our needs assessment assignment, we want to be clear when asking if they'll grant us an interview that we are doing an interview for the class assignment only. So we are not actually engaging in a formal program evaluation. We are not even engaging in formal research. We are simply trying to learn from the interviewees' experiences and expertise. Okay, so we're not offering any services. We are not acting on behalf of the agency, because really this course is designed more as a vehicle for your own learning and not for you to be engaged in any sort of professional program evaluation. So when you contact and you're recruiting your participants for this class project, if you send them a text or email, this information should be clearly stated so that they don't believe that you are actually offering any research or any actual program evaluation. So when you conduct interviews, we also want you to engage as social work practitioners and help uphold the highest level of ethical standards. So we want you to talk about self-determination, which means that the participant can stop the interview at any time. If they also can refuse to answer certain questions that they don't feel comfortable answering. And you also want to give them informed consent. So that means that you need some sort of verbal agreement or confirmation that they are indeed comfortable participating in your class project. And if you are recording these interviews, which I suggest you do, or if you are taking in-depth detailed notes, you should also inform your participant that you are doing so. Okay, so this week we're going to have some fun. So this recording is going to be a little bit longer than my other recordings because we're going to get into some of the nuts and bolts of qualitative data analysis. I'm also going to, in addition to posting my recording, I'm also going to post the PowerPoint, because some of this I'm going to skim over a little bit, but I want you to really go back into my slides when I show you some examples of interview transcripts and ways to code them. So there's a lot of information. We're going to break this up into 2 weeks. So we have have this week, week 4, and week 5 both dedicated to the same topic of qualitative data analysis. So today we're going to try to identify themes. And we do this in our work every day as social workers and in our lives. So think about when you micro social work practice, then think about when you're doing an assessment and you're writing up your case notes related to that. Often you are pinging on certain themes that your client has just expressed to you on maybe some challenges, frustrations that they're going through in their own life. We also, set goals with our clients. We also think about their strengths, and those are usually us doing some kind of thematic analysis, maybe not in a systematic way, but we are used to in our everyday life producing and generating themes. So we are going to use two different authors that I love very much. First is Johnny Saldana, and he has written this coding manual for qualitative researchers, and we're really going to draw from his work. And the second is Miles and Huberman and Saldana have partnered to develop a qualitative data analysis method sourcebook. So do not worry, you do not need to purchase these books. I just want to let you know where you can find more in-depth information on the topics we're going to cover today. So I want to get a little philosophical on you for a minute, because when we think about research, most of us are actually more used to looking at quantitative data analysis or statistical analysis. And qualitative research is different in terms of its ontological, epistemological, axiology, and methodology. So in terms of our ontological assumptions, as qualitative researchers, we don't tend to believe that there is one shared reality on this planet, but we are interested in embracing multiple realities. So our intentionality in reporting on qualitative data is not to regress towards the mean. We're not interested in reporting averages. We're really interested in reporting on a range of experiences. So multiple points of view are highlighted and really celebrated within qualitative work. Second is epistemology. So in terms of our epistemology, or like how we look for truth with a capital T, or the philosophy of science, we like to get as close to our participants as possible. So we don't tend to like to sit at home and analyze large statistical data sets. We like to engage in field work. So get as close to our participants as possible, so we understand their social worlds, their realities, their individual views, and that is how we believe knowledge is known. Third is axiology. So I've been actually priming you to engage in this, which is also often known as positionality, where as researchers, we want to make our values unknown in our study. So who you are matters as a researcher. What you stand to gain by virtue of being in the research process is important. What are your positions on an existing knowledge based on the program that you are going to engage in with program evaluation? That is important to state on the onset of your study. So because you yourself are often the research instrument when engaging in qualitative interviewing. And lastly, our methodology is known as inductive and emergent. So we often add in new pieces of information. We often add in new types of methods. Maybe we end up incorporating art or journals or narratives or videos into our work. So we go into our research process really open-minded in terms of what types of materials we need to gather. And we are constantly in a process of collecting data, analyzing data, collecting data, analyzing. So we often jump in and out of the field. So Miles, Huberman, and Saldana really break down 3 simple steps related to engaging in qualitative research. So the first step is really where we are at right now. We are really in the pre-data collection period. That's when you're submitting your interview plan. That's when you're setting up your interview guide. That's when you're contacting your participant. Then you move into data collection, and then you move into post-data collection, which really involves the analysis or coding of your data. And this involves data reduction. So we're often taking large interview transcripts and we are reducing them by applying codes, which we're going to learn about in a second. We also then want to engage in what's known as data display. So we often try to make a figure or sort of a more thematic picture of our work. And lastly, we engage in conclusion drawing and verification. And verification often means going back out into the field and re-interviewing people or conducting focus groups to see if our results hold true, to see if we got it right as researchers. So today we are only going to focus on step 1, which is data reduction. So this is an introduction to codes and coding. Next week, we will focus on steps 2 and 3, which is data display and conclusion drawing and verification. So what are codes? What am I talking about when I'm saying we're going to be developing and applying codes? So codes in qualitative research are a technique we use, which we often develop a word or a short phrase that symbolically assigns a summative, salient, essence capturing, or evocative attribute for a portion of language-based or visual data. So this is not a precise science, it's an interpretive act, which means it's generated by us as researchers and usually along partnership with a research team. And coding in the frame of mind of a qualitative researcher is really just one way of analyzing qualitative data, not the only way. So an analogy that I like to give to students, because you're probably more familiar with doing data analysis with quantitative data or numerical data, is that just as quantitative measures, also known as statistics, are numeric, symbolic summaries of meaning, such as, 87% of my clients said this, or 9 out of 10 people said this, or this person was 63 years old. Qualitative codes are language-based symbolic summaries of textual or visual data. So qualitative coding generally uses words and phrases, not numbers, to summarize our data's meaning as interpreted by us as the analyst. So here are some examples, and I'm going to go through these examples fairly quickly to focus on mainly the technique of coding, but I'm going to post these all this week so you can kind of go back in and see how the code was applied in relationship to the data. So I really like to organize my qualitative data similar to this, so that my actual interview transcripts or notes are on the left-hand side of the page, and my codes are on the right-hand side of the page. And I usually like to link them in Microsoft Word, maybe through using the comments feature, or I like to number them as you see in front of you. So you can see that the coder of these data took some of the main points or themes from the transcripts and tried to develop some sort of symbolic meaning. So I'll just use the first part as an example. So he cares about me. He has never told me, but he does. So that is the coder assigned as being sense of worth. He's always been there for me. They coded that as stability. So you can see some examples here. So the goals of coding are that we want to reflect deeply on the meaning of each quantitative datum. So that's a singular concept. We want to condense but not reduce the richness of our data. We want to try to develop categories, concepts, themes, assertions, or potentially later on in more advanced qualitative data methods, perhaps a theory. So one of my favorite researchers who is a grounded theorist named Kathy Sharma talks about this first stage as gathering bones. So she's like, you need to gather bones. And then later on you cluster the bones, which is really to develop theory. And then you cluster, let's say, all the hand bones together and all the foot bones together and all the leg bones together. And later on, let's say if you're building theory, which is beyond the scope of this class, you would then develop your bones into what's known as like a working skeleton or a conceptual framework. So our goal is try to build these codes into more categories or concepts or themes, which are really more abstracts. We're going to this from the specific to the abstracts. So when we gather all of our codes together, then we're going to pair them together, partner them together, or group them together into categories comprised of codes that look alike and codes that feel alike. So categories embody and label the pattern you found and constructed from your qualitative data analysis. So a category label, like a code, is a word or short phrase that symbolically assigns the same summative attribute of the data. So as you can see, this is a great example, I think, of how category development forms. So let's say you're going through your interview transcript and you're noticing that, you have a code called name calling. You have another code saying threatening. You have another code that's saying laughed at. So if you're doing a study on bullying, you're like, well, what is the commonality between all of these codes? And then you realize that you've developed a category called verbal oppression. Same with pushing, fighting, scratching, you can categorize as physical oppression. So that's just really a basic summary of how you can maybe turn codes into categories. And then the categories are often called themes in your data. So I also like to use the analogy that qualitative coding and analysis is really like decorating a house. You often decorate and then you step back and then you see if you want to change something around, then you go back in, then you step back out again. So this is all to say that people rarely get coding right on the first time. You are expected to code and recode and refine some of your conceptual categories. So I also want to give you an example of how this fits maybe together conceptually at later stage. So this is a really interesting study or a figure, a data visualization from a study on how people transition from mid-career to retirement. So it's really a phase or process model. So the top represents somebody who's in their mid-career and the bottom represents somebody who's transitioning to being fully retired. And you can see that they have their codes on the left-hand side, and then they sort of develop them into like maybe some subcategories that led to a larger category of, oh, this is continuing career phase versus the career bridge phase versus the non-career bridge versus being fully retired. So that's just another example of how conceptually things can fit together. So the mechanics of coding involve formatting data in stanzas or units with margins of space for codes and jotting. So you want to make sure that when you format your coding, you leave a lot of space on the right-hand side so that you can apply codes, you can maybe do some drawings, you can maybe do some diagramming as well. So you want to pre-code and make preliminary jottings as you are formatting your data. So for example, this is a piece of a transcript that the coder assigned student debt, but they also questioned, is this related to anxiety? So you can see that that is the coder making notes for themselves. You can also code as a lumper, and that is where you take a larger paragraph of data and then you assign a code to it that really summarizes a large chunk of data. So that is a way to kind of mark one theme that is expressed across a paragraph of data. You could also code as a splitter, meaning coding is an effective way to split up many different small ideas that come across in a larger paragraph so that you can really understand the nuance of what's happening or what somebody's trying to explain to you. And I also wanted to show this example because you can actually code in a form which is known as in vivo coding, where you are actually using the participants' very words as your code. So that's why there's quotations. So they just pulled out the word reality, I thought I was so ready, unique situation. So that's another strategy. So some of the essential references I find for coding qualitative data are really just vocabulary builders. So we want to think about different ways that we can express the same term, or we want to use a thesaurus to try to look at multiple meanings and definitions of similar words. That's how you really can get better at coding. You can also use very basic software to code to really organize your data. So this is an example of Microsoft Word, where you can see there's a numeric feature. See 89 here is linked to a text box that has the code in it. That's a really great simple strategy to use. You can also pull out chunks of data in Excel and put them in columns and link them to your codes as well. So I really like to end thinking about this phase of qualitative research is that good research is not about good methods as much as it is about good thinking. So I really want you to think and ponder about your data and take time with your data. And that often comes with transcribing your interviews, with coding, with stepping back, with going back in again, and trying to refine our processes as we go. So another analogy is that just as there's different forms of numeric representation in statistics, there's also different types of coding. So you can use descriptive coding, you can code for a person's values, you can code for a person's emotions, you can code for cause and effect within your data. So here's an example of the cause and effect. So this project is again about bullying. And you can see that they ended up, the coder on the bold statements said that that was, a process that was rooted in something happening to a person, and then they wanted to code the outcome. So they wanted to focus on like false accusations as being the event. And then in the caps, they wanted to code for the outcomes. So saying things are true, assuming by others. Let's look at another one. So social awareness is something that popped up in their data. And then they wanted to look back in their data and say, oh, the outcome of that was that the individual learned a lot about people. So I think this is a very helpful technique in thinking about program evaluation and qualitative data analysis more largely, is that we often want to think about the outcomes of the program that we are implementing. So coding decisions and coding outcomes. So after initial breaking in period has passed, you should feel more comfortable and confident in applying your code. Sort of an analytic pathway will emerge. And as you're applying the coding methods, you should also maybe be engaging in writing analytic memos. And your analytic memos can really link onto your needs assessment assignment this week, because it really fills in the blank on the section where you're really supposed to report on your findings. So when becoming stuck in qualitative data analysis and really wanting to reflect on what to write about when we feel stuck, you can go back to this slide and look for ideas. So it can be a descriptive summary. It can be how you personally relate to the participants or the phenomenon. You can reflect on the participants' actions, reactions, or interactions. You can reflect on routines, rituals, rules, roles, lots of R's right there. I often like to focus on what I think is surprising in my data, because that to me as a social scientist leads me to believe, what am I doing with this study that is generating new knowledge? Okay, so getting back into the course content this week, as you practice with examples, it will help you gain more knowledge and confidence in completing your own interviews and identifying themes. So this week we actually have a blog assignment where I am assigning you a speech by Dr. Brene Brown, who is a social worker and social scientist at the University of Houston. But she gives a lecture on the anatomy of trust. And there's some strengths and weaknesses to her actual speech around this, but one of the strengths that I think is that she constantly refers to, I had to go back into the data. I had to see what the data showed me. And then the data showed me this. And what she's referring to is themes. So in her speech around the anatomy or the composition of trust, she pulls from her data, which are her participants' very words. And then you can see how a more abstract thematic concept comes from that. So that's why I really want to stick with her video this week, because I think that students find it helpful to be able to reflect on the concepts and themes that she shares and show how they're grounded in qualitative data. I will also provide feedback and also help if you get stuck in your interviewing process. I'm more than happy to look at your interviewing guides or your interview guides, but just make sure you are contacting people and setting up interviews, because this class is moving fast. Speaking of which, your needs assessment is due February 15th. It's coming up really soon at 11:59 p.m. right before midnight. And Brandon and I are hosting an optional synchronous session, which we will record, which is on February 7th from 7 to 8 p.m. And mark your calendars for that. Students actually find that really helpful for being able to workshop their ideas related to their needs assessment. So I want you to try to complete one qualitative interview. Since next week you will be using an interview to identify themes, but if you can get more than one interview completed this week, by all means, work ahead of schedule, because people often cancel on our interviews and you have to reschedule. So if someone's willing to talk now, make sure you get that in. Just a few notes. Next week, we are actually going to be using the same soft chalk that we are using this week. So it's going to be uploaded 2 weeks in a row. There's a lot of information related to qualitative data collection and analysis. So just don't be confused when you see the same one next week. We just want you to review it. And we want you to identify themes from your own interview and complete one this week, like we just said previously, and a quick look at really the anatomy of our needs assessment assignment. So it's going to begin with an overview. It's going to have a description of your project partners, which, newsflash, you've already done that in your interview plan. So do not reinvent the wheel, just recycle what you've already done and what we've approved from our journals for week 3. We want to see an interview guide. Please send those to me if you need feedback ahead of time. Your themes, which we talked about developing them today, and your findings. And your findings really lead to more like conclusive outcomes related to, what are the implications for social work practice? What might a program look like to address these needs that I've found thematically? So just remember, maximum length is 7 pages, minimum 5 pages. Should be APA format. And I've also posted a lot of helpful materials for you this week. So in this week's course content, we have that example interview guide. Go under the assignments tab, where you can not only see an example needs assessment assignment, you see the guidelines for the assignment, you see a rubric, and you can also see a video of me breaking down that assignment. All right, and in conclusion, this week's inspirational quote is about drive, which is the desire is key to motivation, but it's determination and commitment to an unrelenting pursuit of your goal, a commitment to excellence that will enable you to attain the success you seek. So just remember, when things get hard this semester, just tap into your drive. And I continue to look forward to working with you. And I will see you all next week, if not before then. Thank you very much. Bye.